T-minus 3, 2, 1, 0.
Hey folks, welcome to another episode of the Launch Sequence Podcast, that little space podcast that generally just talks about Star Citizen. Today, we are touching on a subject that hasn't come up in a couple of months, but it's pretty important if you haven't heard about server meshing. Star Citizen is going to depend on it. And I thought I'd bring in two people who have recently given their own reactions to the CitizenCon server meshing presentation. Got a lot of great feedback, and I think a lot of good discussion going, and a lot of people really interested in server meshing from a more technical standpoint. So I figured, why not bring you guys on, put you in the room together, and let you talk about things that generally fly over my head, and I'll just kind of nod and ask questions and pretend like I know what's going on, and maybe we can help introduce the community at large to more better, greater understanding of server meshing. So Tybio and Kevin, thank you both for joining me today. How are you both doing?
Doing excellent, man. How about yourself?
Oh, I'm great. Thanks for asking. Kevin, what about you?
Doing good. Yeah.
Cool. Well, both of you were kind enough to agree to come in today, and I figured we should probably start by introducing who you are and letting people know your own pedigree and why you want to talk about this kind of stuff. So why don't we start with you, Tybio? What is it that you do? Why did you kind of take on this subject and start talking about server meshing?
Well, thank you. I've worked in the networking field since '94 with Suronet back before it was the internet. And I started in operations, worked in engineering, architecture for all the big boys. And then I guess about 10 years ago, I moved into network automation and control, which is a lot of words to saying, do things without people involved. That was actually about the time I got involved with Star Citizen for the first time. And then after this last CitizenCon, there was a lot of comments going on after the demo, and I just thought I could add some value and clarify some of the pieces that I knew well. And I want to thank Kevin because his video was the one that got me thinking about, hey, I can actually do this. So that's where it all came from.
Cool. Yeah, community does a good job of bouncing ideas off each other. So did you play Star Citizen in that you kind of said you found out about Star Citizen about 10 years ago, and then now with this CitizenCon, you started talking about it. But in between that time, were you really that interested in the game?
I was always interested in it, but I faded in and out over the years. I actually backed on Kickstarter in 2012. I think it was 12 when it first came out. And then I played a little bit around before when the hangars were still involved. When I guess the hangar module, whatever we used to call it back in the day. And then a little bit more when the Persistent Universe came out, but I haven't been like a consistent player. I've kind of been gating myself so I don't burn out too much on it before it hits the wild,
Good call. It's a good idea. Yeah. Kevin, how about yourself? What brings you to Star Citizen, and what is your background regarding this kind of stuff?
Yeah. So I come out of software engineering. I studied that in school. I realized pretty quickly that I wasn't going to be happy spending 40 hours in a cube writing code and not talking to anybody. I might secretly be an extrovert. So that was important to realize. And so I bounced around for a few years out of school, tried a bunch of things and wound up in actually cybersecurity. Although weird mix of circumstances, but it was sort of a hybrid cybersecurity SRE role. I was working in a company called Akamai on the information security team there, but we got given responsibility for the company's incident management process, which was, everything from one of the links on one of the data centers is down, we got to go call the internet service provider and get them to light it back up, or big internet scale crises like Heartbleed I was there through. So working on that stuff was fun. And it gave me sort of like an SRE side as well as a cybersecurity side. I moved out to the Bay Area from Boston about 5 years ago, did some cybersecurity stuff out here. and then started my own cybersecurity consulting company about 3 years ago, which is what I've been doing ever since. And I've also been playing Star Citizen. I was not an original Kickstarter backer, but I got a game package pretty much as soon as it was available. And I have been playing more. I think Star Citizen is definitely the video game that I have logged the most hours in by a large margin.
Okay.
Yeah, I've been pretty active. And so, I don't know, because I like systems, I don't mind the sort of jank. I think I have, in fact, find that I take more joy from it when there is a little bit of jank, and I'm like trying to figure out, oh, why did I fall through the floor again? While I am like swearing and trying to frantically put my helmet back on.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, you choke out and die for the 5th time. Yeah, I get that.
That session. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Fall down an elevator shaft,
Again, in Grim Hex, yes.
Fall down it. The elevator shaft chases me. I can't get away. But yeah, okay. So, Kevin, you've been playing pretty regularly. Tybio, you've been interested, but haven't been jumping in too often. But you both decided to throw YouTube videos up about this. Now, I think, Kevin, you were already doing some content before that, but both of you, these videos, I think, did better than you were expecting, you were saying before the podcast. Why did you feel now was the time to start talking about this? Like, they've done server meshing presentations before. Does something feel different specifically now? I guess besides the fact that it actually showed in the video.
I think that
I'll
was
let Kevin go first since he was the first video.
Okay, thanks. I think that was it for me. Well, so I had actually started making content on another channel for work stuff. criticalpoint.tv, by the way, if you want to hear. I've been interviewing software engineers about that time they broke production. So it actually, a lot of fun stories.
Anyone from SIG yet?
No, I don't have anyone from CIG yet. I have been trying to get in touch with them. I'm sure they're very busy, but if somebody there has a story they would love to tell, would love to have them on the podcast. Absolutely. I interviewed a guy who worked at Blizzard on the launch of Diablo 2 Resurrected and wound up taking it down. I think, I'm proud of all the interviews that I've done, but that is hands down my favorite interview that I've done for the podcast, Zachary Johnson. That was a really fun chat and gave me a little bit of context on how game servers work behind the scenes, which was useful for the server meshing video. And so I posted something about the graph database woes that Star Citizen had been having a few months ago, because that was something where I had some context, and I was pretty sure that none of the YouTubers who I follow they'd all done videos about it, but they'd kind of been like, I don't know what's going on here.
Yeah, you can only know so much just from watching CIG's videos.
Well, exactly, yeah. And if you haven't worked with the particular software that they're using, you have no idea what it is. And if you don't work in software, then you have, no idea what's going on. So I did a little video. I did it mostly because I was to satisfy my own sort of this is a thing that I know. I think people would find it interesting. I should post it, but I posted it on my personal channel, which is kind of a catch-all, and assumed that 30 people would watch it or whatever, and go to bed, wake up the next morning, and it has 2,000 views or something. I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah, that'll catch you off guard sometimes.
Yeah, and then. Sorry, some of the comments to my video. One of the comments to my video was like, "Oh, I would love to hear from you about server meshing," because the CitizenCon presentation was, just then coming up or had just happened. I actually found my personal email and emailed me. It was like, "I'm a fan. I really enjoyed your video. Would you do a video on server meshing?"
That's awesome.
So I guess I gotta.
Yeah. Well, thank you for doing that. We wouldn't be having this podcast if you didn't.
Yeah.
So really, it was popular demand.
Yes. 100%.
Tybio, how about yourself? I mean, I know you said you were inspired, but was there anything else that factored into it?
Yeah, I actually watched the CitizenCon. I think I actually watched one of your review recordings of the server meshing, because I couldn't watch this stuff live. I was working, but then I saw Kevin's, and I was reading through some of the responses to it, and various other server meshing, and it seemed like there was a gap and it kind of grated on me because it was kind of a fundamental understanding gap. And honestly, it was a little bit out of frustration that I made that first video. It was more a release to say, at least put it out there that, like some of what you guys are saying is obviously true, but there's a whole bunch of stuff that's kind of irrelevant or just flat doesn't factor in here. And that one really took off. It was unbelievable what happened the next day. I had no idea. And since then, it's just been a roller coaster.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I got sent your video a couple times within about a week. And Kevin, I had seen yours too as well. I didn't get to watch through the whole thing, but I had seen it posted. And yeah, I think you make a good point there. One of the best things that we could probably do here today is to try to clearly communicate the problems facing CIG and the possible path they have to server meshing for a layman. Because it's really, I still don't think they've really put out a good roadmap for people to expect, probably for good reasons. as folks who work in the industry, I'm guessing that that's not a good idea publicly. But maybe we can try and guess at something today. So why don't you start us off just kind of naming one of the biggest things that you see that you feel like gets misconstrued when we're talking about server meshing? We'll go from there.
You want me to?
Yeah. This was specifically talking about the things you were noticing. Yeah.
Okay. Probably the biggest one is just the sheer level of complexity. It seems like there's this desire to simplify it down in order to kind of imply that why is it taking so long? And there's kind of this balance I'm trying to struggle with keeping where, yes, I think it's taken a really long time to get there, but it's not like they could have turned this around in a year, right? I mean, this is some deep stuff they're doing here. So maybe not 12 years, but once they hit the ground running, it's not going to be like 6 months later, right? You're talking years of development to get something this complex solid enough to roll out even in an alpha state. So to me, that was what I was trying to convey, that we don't have to be pleased necessarily about the 12 years of history.
Oh yeah.
But we still have to be realistic about the level of complexity that they're fighting with to make this thing happen. Right.
Yeah.
And from my opinion, or one of the things I noticed was I kept hearing, like, throughout since CitizenCon, they've been these little dribs and drabs of leaks or information about how well it's going, how well the testing's going on these things when they do it. And every time I hear that, I get more nervous. I don't know about you, Kevin, but whenever I go through a testing cycle that goes really well, I get really scared.
Raise expectations.
It means I've missed something.
Oh,
right?
okay.
Yep.
Yeah, that's fair. I've tried coding. There's a reason I'm not doing it anymore. I remember though, in my intro to the computer science class, just going through the process of bug fixing, probably one of the most simple blocks of code you could come up with, and realizing when things go right, I get worried. It was just like, it was very natural too. I was like, okay, I've gotten so many errors, this doesn't make sense that it's working. But do you think that while these are leaks, do you think that communication about the status of server meshing is better or worse to share? And this is for either of you, because
I just talked, so I'll let Kevin get that, and I'll jump in at the end.
Yeah.
I feel like, I don't know, I always want more information than less information, and I really admired CIG for how much they've been willing to build in public, even though it has gotten them, at times a lot of flack. But I mean, like, coming from the cybersecurity side, I'm always pushing for more disclosure of like what happened in a cybersecurity incident. And so here, I really, value their willingness to, tell us as much as they can. Largely because I find it really personally interesting. I'm fascinated by how these systems work and all the work that goes into them, and like. I just, in the same way that I enjoy watching like factory tours behind the scenes of how, computer monitors get made. I enjoy watching stuff like this about like how video games get made.
Yeah.
There's a lot of human effort that goes into this.
It's honestly, people don't realize that that's a big part of the reason Star Citizen has success is because it's a bunch of people who really like watching the process as well as playing the game too.
Yeah.
Very much.
And talking about the process endlessly.
Yeah, endlessly. Absolutely. And I mean, oh, go ahead. Sorry, Ken.
Well, and my attitude about the game itself has always been that, like, I'm not here for whatever the game is, you know, in the Platonic future vision. I'm here for what the game is today. And it happens that I enjoy it, you know, being, you know, kind of in the state that it is. And I enjoy getting to participate in the process of, like, making it the thing that we all want it to be. And so that's, yeah, that's something I really value about Star Citizen that no other, you know, video game, you know, frankly, few other things in life have given me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I mean, I even when I wasn't playing, I was still keeping up with what was going on in the, you know, in the news. Not that there was much until pretty recently, but I was doing my best. And to your initial question, I would say I'm kind of torn because I don't think the way it works, and Kevin, jump in here if I'm getting this wrong, but the way an engineering group tends to work is to pose an idea, start working on it, figure out where it won't work, retool that section, and then it's just a constant cycle of iteration. And people who aren't in that world often see that as failure when that's actually the process working, because it's how you refine and get a better outcome. And again, I want to be careful not to say that 12 years is, you know, fine, it's you know, it's perfect. But at the same time, it makes it a problem if you release news and then in 3 years you come back and say, well, it's now we're doing it this way. Right. So they're in that kind of information bind that, you know, I work for a vendor right now and I deal with that every day, right? Okay, what do I tell the customers? What don't I tell the customers? How much of my capital, how much of my trust that I have from the customer can I burn if this ends up being wrong? And then do I stop becoming a valuable source of information for them? And that's the bind.
It really seems to come from perspective too. You can have bad news that if you don't have the context looks extremely bad compared to with the context makes sense. And I think with software development, that's probably more true than a lot of other things that people are more familiar with. You know, if you are building a car and you're like, oh, we can't, the car doesn't work because we can't get the exhaust fumes out enough. People understand that you can just make the exhaust bigger to get more fumes out. But when it comes to a game and you're like, oh, well, we built this system, but it seems to make everybody's legs disappear. People are going to be like, oh my God, the game, what do we do?
Or so it makes everyone do a T-pose on a chair.
Yeah, our favorites. So I think there's some perspective there too. But you're also, I want to get back to the specifics of server meshing again soon, but now you've brought up this new topic of the time it's taken. And I would be interested in, you guys have both had what sounds like at least a decade of experience in the industry with large companies that are probably releasing large products, and maybe even small companies that are just in their like beginning years. From your perspective with CIG's history and how this has all gone, does 12 years feel like it's too much for this kind of thing?
Well, it's challenging because it all depends on their goal for the release, right? Did they spend 7 years shooting for absolute perfection, which is unattainable, and then suddenly have to realize that, you know, we got to get this at least workable and then iterate on it from there? Or did they have a 12-year plan 12 years ago and they just didn't tell us? You know, so not knowing which of those, and I have a guess, right, as to which it was.
Go creep.
But there is a learning curve for a company like CIG that doesn't have a historical presence, right? They don't have a methodology to know when they're going down blind alleys or when they're chasing too hard for perfection. So I do think they suffered from a lot of that, and I don't want to say that 12 years is too long, but it has that feel about it that it could have been shorter. I guess I'm struggling because I don't want to cast aspersions on other engineers when I have no idea what's going on, right?
Yeah, you know
But at
how
the
it
same
feels to be in the
time,
other
12
seat.
years is a long time.
Yeah. I think there are definitely clear signs that they expected things to happen sooner. And I think a lot of what we see of Star Citizen now really started in like 2018, right? With 3.0. Like that was the point where they got the 4 updates a quarter going, or 4 updates a year going. That was the point where we started to see free fly events. We got Invictus Week. They started doing global events and missions, and like it felt like they actually had something together. So a lot of times I do consider, I'm never going to say that like the development time started later, but I do think about those first 3 years as being kind of they were figuring some stuff out. First 3 years, gosh, that was 6 years.
Yeah, it was 6 years, and it did. I agree with you. It felt very much like they found a focus. They refocused and narrowed their view in on achieving things, and
Yeah.
I agree.
And then a few years later too, about 2020, it felt like that happened again, and now again, kind of feeling like that. So I'm not saying there's a cycle, but Kevin, I see you nodding. Is that what you notice?
The launch of the first Xenothreat, the first global event. Yeah, I'm having some internet connection issues.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
No problem.
I do think, I don't know, one of the things that I know about projects like this is that they have a tendency to like come together. There's often a lot of sort of like foundation that has to be laid, and then once the foundation is in place, the superstructure can go up very rapidly.
Sorry, we lost you for a bit right there.
Nope. There, are you back?
Should be back. There we go.
Okay.
I got you. You're good.
Cool. Good. The other thing that gives me some sympathy for them is that, as a friend of mine puts it, they have only chosen to solve 5 of the hardest problems in computer science at once.
What are those?
That's a great quote.
I think she's being a little bit facetious, but the latency and correctness constraints or latency and reliability constraints is just like, no one else has built this, and there's a reason that no one else has built this. And it'll be very interesting to see if they can pull it off. I think we might live in the first moment where it is possible, in terms of which pioneered the same.
Hold on, sorry. Can you say that again? I missed. You cut off a bit there. You said somebody pioneered something.
Okay.
I think you're back. You're good.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
See if I can stay back. How much of that did you catch?
You got to start over from whoever pioneered something.
Okay.
Yeah.
What was I saying? So one of the touchstones for for how hard a problem this is for me is EVE Online, which pioneered this.
Oh no. We can't figure out who pioneered it. Wait,
Oh no.
EVE Online.
No. Yeah, I got you. EVE Online pioneered some. Go ahead.
EVE Online pioneered this idea of a single, shared universe with, tens of thousands of people in it. But they do their server meshing at the system level. And, they were doing this 20, 25 years ago, which is incredibly impressive. They had to make a lot of. EVE kind of pioneered this idea of having, a single game world
which is implemented by multiple, in their case, actually physical servers. When they started, my understanding is they were, racking and stacking servers in a data center in, New York, maybe data centers in Europe, and they made that work. They made a lot of smart design decisions to enable them to do that. And even so, there's this great series of books called Empires of Eve, which tells sort of the history of the player corporations of Eve Online.
That's crazy.
It's great. It's like what was it? Julius Caesar's history of the Gallic Wars or something, but about a video game. Highly recommend it. It's on Amazon. It's brilliant. Fascinating stories. But they really pioneered this idea of a single universe, but they do server meshing sort of at the system boundary, and you jump from system to system, and you get handed off from server to server. And a friend of mine interned there 10 years ago or more now. And so I visited him in Reykjavik and spent, my parents were like, did you go see some glaciers? Did you go see some geysers? I'm like, no, I spent the weekend drinking my way around Reykjavik with him and his coworkers. So I can tell you all the best bars in Reykjavik. But
nice.
So I got some color from him and from them. But nobody has attempted anything with this kind of, first person. Nobody has attempted anything with this kind of latency. Responsiveness needed. Oh, and the thing about reason I was calling out Empires of Eve was because you read the history of Eve Online, and the player corps, are playing the servers as much as they're playing the game. They're using the behavior of the servers to their advantage. They'll even call up Eve or the CCP games and go hey, we're going to have a battle in this system. Can you add extra capacity there?
I mean, and that's kind of what people are saying should happen with Star Citizen. I don't know one way or another, but this last weekend we had the Daymar Rally, and it's a big event. A lot of people are watching. It's a very, I think, good opportunity for CIG, and so people naturally would be like, hey, can you guys, try to make sure these servers are more stable? And unfortunately, we 30K'd in the middle of one of the races, which was, I've never seen that happen during the Daymar Rally, which was always a blessing. But this year they got us.
Getting the full Star Citizen experience.
Yeah, really though.
I mean, I think they're at a point right now, man, where they're locked into this architecture until they flick the switch.
Right.
I'm not entirely sure they have a lot of capability with the servers as they stand today to do anything except kind of keep them online if they're lucky, right?
Yeah. Well, that's a lot of the game too, right? I mean, obviously, if we had our way, the star map would have been changed a long time ago, but they didn't have the bandwidth to do it one way or the other.
And with the star map especially, and all the flash stuff, right? It's so ingrained all the way down that they didn't have that capability to act in a kind of specific way, right? They had to either do all or nothing. Mm-hmm. And my feeling right now is that they're getting to the point where in the next year to year and a half, they're going to start doing those, rip that out, put the new stuff in. And, if they do this right, then that means everything will be more modular moving forward. So they can do those more iterative changes instead of these holistic swap outs. Right.
Let's get back to, Kevin, what you were kind of talking about, getting at, and that is a lot of people's feelings about server meshing is mixed by how people describe it. Some people describe it as the greatest thing in gaming. It's going to change the entire industry. Some people describe it as, it's cool, but other games have done it. And even you were just saying that Eve has their own version, but it's on a different kind of application. In previous episodes, I've had some people come in and talk about server meshing and how it is different in each case. But I think a lot of people are wondering just how actually special what they're doing with server meshing is. So Kevin, since you actually started that kind of conversation, is there anything you want to add to that to really explain your feelings about it?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'll say that I don't know anybody else who's doing anything nearly this scale. Like I say, Eve are the only ones who come close. There was a company who started actually around the same time as Star Citizen called Improbable.io, who had some really interesting tech and were trying to sell it to MMO developers. And I think maybe a Kickstarter MMO picked it up. I forget the name now, but that the Kickstarter MMO died. I checked in on Improbable's site a couple of months ago, in preparation for my server meshing video, and they were doing some kind of NFT nonsense.
Was that the Spatial OS developers?
That sounds right. Yeah.
Okay.
So you know them. Yeah. They have, as far as I can tell, gone nowhere. So.
Yeah, I remember that project. It was, they were running a game called Scavengers, I think, which was like kind of in testing, but never really got anywhere. So really unparalleled in the industry from what you've seen.
Yeah.
How about
to the best of my knowledge?
How about Dual Universe? Is that something that you guys have looked into?
No.
No, that's the only other game I know that attempts something like this. I would check it out. It's not nearly as big, but their big sell was the idea that they were running on server meshing. Everybody was in the same place, and it looked kind of like a more fancy Space Engineers, where everybody was building stuff, trading stuff, and all that kind of thing. I don't know how well it's been going, but I do know that's something that is sometimes compared.
Yeah, I'll definitely look it up. I think one of the keys here is, with the server meshing CIG is doing, I feel like it's not a revolution, it's an evolution, right? It's taking the pieces that have been started through the last 30 years and just, implementing them fully and completely with the new technology. And they're trying to do it in a way that it'll support really any gameplay, which is also something I've never seen before. I've never seen like a space game that wants to do FPS, that wants to do crafting, that wants to do exploration, right? It's this grand vision that's going on. And honestly, solving that sort of portability, as Kevin was saying with Eve, when you narrow the scope down, it's not as difficult. When you broaden the scope out, you just kind of exponentially increase the level of complexity you have to solve for.
Well, and you say it's an evolution and not a revolution, but and I think that may be the way that we experience it. It's just, the universe gets bigger and the tick rate stays the same, but I think on the back end, the kind of engineering, the kind of re-architecture of the underlying server, like the technical term would be state machine, that has been required to go from what is a single-threaded or like lightly multi-threaded process to a fully distributed process is night and day.
Absolutely, I do agree. Their use of like microservices and the spreading across like the Amazon infrastructure, I would agree with that. That is, they can build on that because AWS exists today. When all the other MMOs were around, it didn't.
Right, exactly, yeah.
But there are techniques and technologies that have been learned from the other services that are already running there. That basically all I'm trying to say is they're not like inventing it from the ground up. They're taking a lot of pieces, pulling them together, and then the invention they have is tying those together and adding on the code that makes it work for what they need. Right? They're not trying to reinvent the wheel, right? They're making the car.
They're not trying to yeah, I mean, that's part of it. They are using existing tech. One of the things that came out in my interview with Zach Johnson, who'd been at Blizzard, and which I thought was interesting, was that games and games companies have actually lagged significantly in their adoption of stuff like AWS, any of the like microservice stuff. There are still certainly games out there where the servers are still running on a Windows box. It's one server, one Windows box. These days it's probably a VM, but
it's
single Windows. It's Windows, and it's like a single box, which is managed by an ops team somewhere, or a collection of single boxes, which are managed by an ops team somewhere. Games have been relatively slow to move to this distributed model because of, I think, the shape of the problem that they're solving. And so while CIGR, yeah, composing, maybe it's Kubernetes or AWS or, building a microservice, backend, like I say, if they are not the first to do it, and if they are not the first to do it at this scale, there are not very many other people doing it.
I would actually agree with that, and I think a big piece of that is the time to develop, right? Like WoW isn't going to suddenly throw everything aside and go to a microservices model, right? And everyone in these tends to wait for someone to solve the problem and then dogpile on. And maybe evolution versus revolution was the wrong term. They're definitely breaking into a new era of MMO games. But they're doing that by taking the last 20 years since, the kind of the WoW was the last really, I would call it like revolutionary game just because of how big it got.
Yeah.
But we've been stagnant, for 20 years since then. So it's not, and that's something that a big company like an Activision or a Microsoft, they're not going to invest 10 years in an MMO to recreate this whole technology. The only way this was going to happen was from an independent studio.
That was going to be my next question was if you guys thought any of the other big publishers could or would put the time in, or if they did, maybe it would have taken a lot shorter, do you think?
Again, because of the fundamental complexity of these problems, there is some basic research that had to be done here. And I'm actually super curious to have you send me the name of this guy so I can dig up his patents and figure out what the fundamental underlying technology is. But like I say, there were some unsolved computer science problems that needed to be solved in order to make this work. And so doing it in 10, 12 years is actually yeah, that checks out. And it will be interesting to me to see if, like an Activision or a Ubisoft fast follow on this. The whole.
Oh, yeah, they told me, I was being told that Bethesda was doing that.
No,
I'm sorry, I can't help it.
Yeah,
I'm
sure.
so sorry.
Oh,
I had to deal with that for a long time, all right?
Just throwing out the shade.
Yes. That,
I'm sorry, continue though.
No, yeah. Star Citizen would make a great games as a service. There's absolutely no way you could ever expect to buy it in a box from the store because the whole point is that it is this shared thing. And so you need to, contribute to its maintenance on an ongoing basis. So it certainly seems like, given the kind of way they want their business models to work these days, that it would be appealing to them. The problem of the underlying technology being really challenging to develop. I think also, I suspect the underlying technology is not going to generalize terribly well from Star Citizen. I could be wrong, but my guess is that we are not going to see an explosion of people picking this up, from CIG. Of course, also it's under patent, which CIG has control of. But my suspicion is also not that CIG is particularly likely to be able to take this and build their own sort of Unreal Engine kind of platform for other people to build MMOs on top of with this. My suspicion is that this is fairly tightly integrated with StarEngine and with their client code, and that with AWS, this is not going to be the kind of thing that they can just package and sell.
I agree with you on package and sell. I do think that if they can solve server meshing from a technical standpoint, how do you make this work in a microservice environment? If they kind of hold the intellectual property there, I think they will have assets that could add to Unreal could license and plug it into their engine, right? So I do agree with you. We're probably not going to see Eve buy the StarEngine, right? But I think what they're doing is new enough and impressive enough that they'll have pieces of it that they can license out.
So that's
Yeah,
actually
that's a good point. That's plausible.
that you guys have been talking about microservices, and you mentioned that this is a system or a game that relies on microservices, whereas other games couldn't. I've seen a lot of different names, one of which I'm really curious about is gRPC and the stuff that's based around that programming language or whatever it is. But maybe we could get a little more into the idea of what are these microservices and why does that make it unique the way that it runs this game? And also, it looks like you both want to talk about gRPC, so that that too. Whoever wants to start out.
Go ahead, Kevin. This is I'll feed off what you say, man. This is your
Sure
specialty.
thing. So back in the day when I started writing software, especially software on the web, so web service stuff, the way that we wrote it was the architecture was we would have a sort of front end, which was responsible for like talking with clients, and then we would have a big application, and then we would have a database. And the application's job was to talk to the database, and the web server's job was to talk to the client of the application. And this worked great until you hit like about 1,000 employees at a company. And then the pressure of all of the, so about 30% of those are engineers. So the pressure of like 300 engineers all trying to coordinate on a single code base got too much. And also we realized that like computers had gotten fast enough, networks had gotten fast enough that we no longer needed to keep everything on a single server. In fact, we were increasingly like running the same big ball of mud application across many servers in order to sort of support the load with like a single database or a couple databases behind it, a single web front end or a few web front ends in front of it. And so it made more and more sense to like pull out pieces of it and give them to a team and let the team run them, define some interfaces using the same kinds of patterns that we use between between like client code and server code, for example, and then let the team own like, an authentication service or a service whose job is to go talk with a credit card company and, authorize a charge, for example,
Okay. Yeah.
And but games, again, have like lagged behind this. Games still overwhelmingly run with this kind of like big ball of mud architecture, which is a pejorative term, and I don't actually mean it that way. It makes sense in a lot of cases, but like, it is the technical term. Monolithic architecture is actually the technical term. And so we found substantial benefit in like pulling out different pieces and letting them talk to each other. I always say that the degenerate case of a microservice architecture is where there is more than one service for every engineer at the company. And no one I've ever worked for has ever been nearly close to that, but you do wind up sometimes in some of these large tech companies with like 50, 100, 150 microservices. And yeah, if you've ever like loaded a web page and like half of the web page doesn't load, your browser says the web page is fully loaded, but there's a bunch of things spinning on, like each of those things that is spinning is talking to potentially a different microservice on the back end. And you can wind up with hilarious or terrible results. And so I tend to believe that there is a like right amount of microservices, and we have gone too far in the direction of too many.
As we do.
Many places, as we do.
Yeah, I mean the classic example here is credit card processing, as Kevin brought up, right? If you like Ticketmaster, for example, right? They I don't know when, but at some point they were a monolithic infrastructure, and then a Taylor Swift concert went on sale and it blew up. So what microservices allowed them to do was, they had maybe 4 credit card processing microservices up at a time. As the volume increased, they would be able to fire up copies or new processing and split the load across more services to handle these spikes. And then conversely, shrink that back down afterwards, so they're not spending a ton of money for this monolithic infrastructure that is sized to handle the worst case scenario. Right.
In point of fact, I suspect that they only have one credit card processing microservice. When I worked at Stripe, I got a little bit of insight into the structure of that, and it's actually very slow. You get relatively few requests. But
that's true.
Your point stands. Like, there are a lot of other places where microservices allow us to, and also the knobs and levers that AWS gives us allow us to like auto scale. So if we get a big capacity spike, especially on the application side, we can go, like double or quadruple the number of servers that are dedicated to a particular task for like a couple hours, and then shut them down and only pay for the hours that we're using. Rather than, back in the old day, like if you wanted to double the number of servers, you had to, go through procurement, get the hardware shipped to you, get somebody to stick it in the rack.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is one of the things that I've had the most trouble conveying to people. And you touched on it, Kevin, in your comment. So I just want to bring this home to everyone. Is scaling horizontally has a point where you spend more time coordinating than you gain in efficiency from doing so. So there will be a point in server meshing where it is no longer beneficial to split the load. And I think that's important for people to comprehend. It's not a how should I put this? It's not a perpetually
servers, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and this is particular to the problem that server meshing is solving. Sorry, because it is not always the case, depending on what problem you're solving, that
Correct.
you need that each of these need to coordinate. It's the fact that you need to do the handoff of one to, the handoff of like a player from one server to another, or the handoff of an object from one server to another.
And you have that boundary zone where they both need to know about where two servers need to know about an object.
Yeah,
exactly. Yes, which makes this a real hard problem.
So
absolutely.
When it comes to this method of running microservices, and you gave an example, for instance, with Ticketmaster, could you guys maybe talk a little bit about any of the microservices you do know that are kind of helping to power server meshing, or how this could benefit Star Citizen above other games that run in the monolithic format that you talked about?
I'll be honest that I'm actually not sure. I haven't, from what I've seen of the architecture that CIG has published, the talks they've given, I'm not sure I would call server meshing a move to a microservice architecture. It's certainly a move to a distributed architecture, and there are, they've actually been moved to a sort of devolution of some of the concerns. So, for example, they stood up an off service at some point to handle that piece of the work. But I think that describing it as a distributed architecture is a little bit more. Maybe this is technical nitpicking. I'm not sure, but
I think it's a distinction maybe only you and I would care about. But for those listening, the difference between a distributed and a microservice is simply size, right? If you're doing a distributed system, okay, fine. But a microservice is really designed to be something that's fast up and down and to solve a specific problem. Right. A distributed architecture is designed to split the load of solving more complex problems. I guess that might be the easiest way. Kevin, does that kind of?
Yeah. And I think for me, a microservice, in a microservice architecture, it's about the number of concerns that are being addressed. You'll have, of those, 50 microservices inside Lyft, for example, like each was solving a different problem. And you could scale them up, but there were, a bunch of services solving different problems. Whereas in server meshing, they're all of these servers are working together to solve the same problem. I think the key for me.
But
yeah, you're right.
But it seemed you guys were alluding to the idea that Star Citizen is adapting this microservice structure as opposed to other games.
I would describe them as adapting modern software operations technologies and techniques.
Yeah,
Yeah,
at least
is
they're not
maybe a better
lagging
way to put
behind
that.
anymore. I mean,
Well, no,
it's,
like
it's
No,
yeah,
they're forged. They're actually they're kind of skipping over a huge number of steps here, right? And I think that's important to recognize. You know, there's been a lot of conversation lately about the different protocols and how this is all going to work. And honestly, we're all kind of inferring because I've never seen anything like this before. Right. So are they using like gRPC? Are they using unicast? Are they using message bus like a Kafka bus? We don't really know at the end of the day how they're transmitting the information. And that's kind of the key piece of information I'm missing on the network side to be able to say what this whole thing's going to look like at the end of the day. Right. So that said, I really do think that the challenge they're going to have is the synchronization between them all. Right.
yeah.
So
where does gRPC fit into all this?
So there was a change log. I forget the official name for it now. There, like one of the updates recently, within the last couple of months, mentioned that they were transitioning one of the backend services, one of what might more reasonably be called the microservices, to gRPC, which is it's just a way for computers to talk to each other. It's just a standard for computers to talk to each other, as well as, or for like software programs, software processes to talk to each other, as well as a bunch of technical tooling around it. It stands literally for Google Remote Procedure Call. RPC is just it's a legacy acronym, legacy technical term.
Yeah, it's a service that's been around forever, but Google kind of modernized it and made it useful again in the current era.
I thought that Google built it from scratch. I could be wrong
They
on
built
that.
their version of it, but RPC has been around for a long time.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm not
Going
saying
back.
they like wrapped the old RPC. They definitely rebuilt it from the ground up, but it kind of fills that same role that the old RPC did.
Yeah, I remember
Right.
they mentioned it back in, I pulled it up here, their letter from the chairman back in 2022 in May. They mentioned that they were switching over to gRPC as they finished building out the services for PES. And that was like the one kind of part of that letter that I was like, okay, this seems like a big change, but I don't really know what that means at all.
It was an odd level of detail in the middle of a more generic. That confused the heck out of me about why they threw that one specific kind of very technical detail in there. To be honest with you, I couldn't figure out why it was there.
Huh.
It was an interesting tidbit.
It was.
Yeah. The cool thing about gRPC is both that it makes it really easy to define message formats, basically. And you get a lot of tooling around allowing, making your programs like send a message from a Java program and receive it in a Python program or C++ or Swift or whatever you happen to be writing in. But it's mostly just about that message format, and it's a highly optimized format.
Yes.
They have really done the work to make it as space efficient as possible and as low latency as possible. And
Yeah,
so,
I mean, because there's a processing engine when it receives the call, whatever the other side is, it has to parse that, and they put a
right.
lot of time into optimizing that.
Yeah.
I'm glad that. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh, no, you're fine. Please, what were you saying?
Okay. The dirty secret of software is that an enormous amount of time, often the majority of the time that a program spends running is spent like taking data from the network and turning it into structures in memory, or taking structures in memory and turning it into stuff that we can send out on the network. We call this serialization and deserialization.
Boy, I've learned that. I've learned that studying Star Citizen. Serialized variables.
Nice. Okay, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. One of many kinds of serialization Star Citizen does.
Is that not the same?
there's also in networking, we have a huge amount of serialization that happens. So once the data gets serialized at the application layer and sent down into the network stack, it also gets serialized, potentially at the protocol level and then definitely at the interface level. So, we're this data is well serialized by the time it hits a wire.
So that's cool.
Yes, it is. It is exactly the same kind of serialization.
Okay.
Yeah. And so the more you can optimize the process of serializing and deserializing data, the faster everything goes. And Google with gRPC have like hyper optimized their serialization and deserialization routines. And so, yeah.
And if you input data that's easy to serialize at the front end,
right.
then you compound the gains.
Right. Yeah. You can do a lot of smart design work there.
Well, let's talk about, we've talked a lot of details of this, but how about the actual possibilities and viability of this from what you guys have seen after that closed demo and, watching both of your videos. Kevin, I know that you had some things to say about the shape of that demo space and shooting bullets and how that might be affected by these servers. And Tybio, in some of your videos, you've talked a little bit about those transitions between servers. And even today, you guys mentioned those. Scaling this up past that one room example to even past our systemic server meshing to like a carrier ship having its own server and a city having a server and a space station, yada, yada, all these things. How realistic do you see that at this point? I know you're missing a lot of context, but from your perspective.
I'll be quick on this as the network guy. My main concern with this goes back to that there's a point where creating 3 servers in the space that demo showed is, I'm sure they would say the same thing, right? It was just for a demo, but you're never going to see, I don't believe, it get down to that level of resolution, having 3 servers that's small, right?
Right.
So, what I would do in my networking brain, because I think of like all of this stuff, especially graphs, in a very different way than maybe Kevin does, because networking is entirely graph theory, but it's applied a little differently. We're more worried about the edges, right? And how those function in networking. But it would be the part that I find the most worrisome is how do they define what is a valid segment for splitting? Like, is it at a doorway? Is it in the middle of a room? How are you going to set the rules up so that the system knows if it's dynamic, right? It can't be completely dynamic, right? There has to be it could be, but that's probably not going to work too well. Mm-hmm. There has to be some sort of structure around it to organize how these different services are split out. And if they're thinking of making it so you could, like, the nightmare scenario would be if you can see across one instance into a third instance, because then your communication between all those instances, it just goes up phenomenally.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So that's what I mean by the size of it. And I think, Kevin, that's what you were kind of getting at in your video as well, yes. Right? And I'll throw it over to you.
Yeah, 100%. So I do disagree. A lot of folks in my comments were like, they're not actually going to have multiple servers managing a single physical space as small as, what they showed in the demo. And my belief, and we will find out, but this is something that I would put good money on, is that if they demoed that, they do intend to ship that at some point. Whether they can make it work at scale, who knows? But like that is the thing that they are trying to build, and that is their ultimate goal. So we'll see. I'm super excited to find out.
Be an interesting situation to need that.
I do think that the technology they're building can do it, but is it worth doing it? I think is the ultimate question. And there's no way I have enough information to even begin to guess on, if the penalty is it actually more efficient to do that? I don't think so. But is it more expensive enough that they won't do it? I don't know.
So I said earlier, I think we live in the first moment where something like this is possible. Whether they'll be able to pull it off, who knows? But like the way that we can now, sort of like scale up and scale down compute, the way, just that we've gotten like much lower latency links, just, as computing power has grown, Moore's law, maybe we're no longer fully tracking, but like, still able to do many, many more operations per second than we were 10 years ago. And so I think that it's possible. So basically the thing that I'm watching, the thing that will determine for me whether server meshing works or not is whether they can get the reliability up to where it needs to be and the latency as low as where it needs to be. And there are real hard trade-offs there. You can make like the reliability of the transition from one server to another a lot higher if you're willing to accept like a second's latency there. And if you're having a firefight in the middle of a hallway, that's not acceptable. You can get the latency much lower if you're willing to accept less reliability. And so that will be, I don't know, that's the fundamental computer science question for me, is whether like they can make that work.
So for both,
and it's the same. Oh, sorry.
No, please.
I was just going to add in, man, that it's the same at the networking layer, right? There's been this set of conversation about the protocols, right? Is it TCP? Is it UDP? Is it multicast? And really what it comes down to with TCP versus UDP is the exact same question, right? Do you want fast and unreliable or slightly slower and reliable? And that all depends, right? Because in AWS, those guys have built their own switches. I don't really know what the latency across their data centers is, but I can't imagine it's meaningful at all, almost. So maybe they can.
At most.
Pardon?
Well, it depends on. It depends. Within a rack is different from across the data center, but it's order of milliseconds, order of single-digit milliseconds at most.
I would be surprised if across a data center breaks a millisecond.
Okay.
I mean, it's the way they're building these things now is it's insane. It's absolutely insane. Now, if they have to go between data centers, right? Like if they're building,
we need a Star Citizen
system,
data center. Like they got everything in one building, please. All game in just one building.
Twitter did that, and Twitter is solving on some level of fairly similar problem of like fan in and fan out. And they built their own data centers, or at least like had big suites in colo in I think about 3 major data centers. So
right.
It's not inconceivable that CIG would do this, except for the ability to scale up and scale down, where like sure you add 10x your number of servers for Fleet Week, and then you scale them down again, and you don't have to pay for all of that capacity. The other
I had cut you off though, Tybio. What were you saying?
Oh no, I would actually, if I could just dovetail on what Kevin was saying there. One of the big concerns I raised in my AWS video is, and I've learned since then a lot more about how they've been working with AWS, but I know tier 1 SaaS companies that are pulling out of AWS because it's so expensive. Not because AWS itself is expensive, but because when you scale it up to the level of these giant, mega corporation levels, right? There's an economy of scale. You're paying someone else to do something that's always going to be more expensive at that scale. I don't think Star Citizen will get to that scale, but cost of AWS was always in the back of my mind, one of those keep an eye ons.
Or that's something. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that's one of those things that people forget about too when they're talking about the cost of the game over these years. And, they mention, it's so many millions. He's looking at how many millions of those dollars went towards just keeping this all running, since the game was running while they're also trying to develop it.
Yeah, I mean, Reddit spends over $20 million a year on AWS. Just Reddit. Right now, I know Star Citizen today isn't at that level, but can we say what'll happen if it actually succeeds in 5 years? Right?
Yeah.
They'll certainly have more players. Yeah. Certainly need more capacity. Yeah. I think that the reason that we see a lot of the tier one sort of SaaS companies moving off AWS is because they have enough capacity, or they have enough need of a particular thing. So like when Dropbox moved off AWS for storage, like it just made more sense for them to do that themselves because they could get cheaper prices. Their operational costs were overwhelmingly dominated by their storage costs, and they no longer needed the flexibility that the public cloud provided them. Same with Netflix moving. Same with Netflix building out their own CDN. Was that they just had the capacity that it made sense for them to do that. And
it's that volume level, right? Once you get to a certain point, paying someone else to do it. And real quick, I think what more people are doing is splitting it. They're taking some of their services and leaving them there, and then the expensive ones they're pulling out.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, whatever service serves us 30Ks in Star Citizen, I'd like to remove that one and send it somewhere else far, far away.
Yes.
I want to wrap up this conversation with a look from the perspective of a normal player. When Star Citizen is developing or implementing server meshing, obviously we have no way of knowing for sure how this goes, but we all saw what happened with PES and how that rolled out. They've said they've tried to change things since then, so it's not as big an immediate drop all at once to mess up your whole game. But I imagine players are curious. When server meshing finally does enter the game, whichever way they do it, static or whatever, will players even notice a difference? Is it going to be something gradually you think that happens? Will the game suddenly start running better? How do you guys see this rollout?
I'm gonna jump in because Kevin, I think you have more to say on this. I would expect that it will roll out first almost exactly what we have today. They'll put the infrastructure in place with a very limited or even one server in it, watch how that functions for a little while, see what's going on before they start. The big one will be when they add that first, that second server, right? The first server, I wouldn't necessarily worry too much about that because that's relatively easy to test. It's the second server that terrifies me. And so I would expect it certainly shouldn't be as bad as PES if they've learned anything, right? That was horrible.
Yeah.
But I also wouldn't expect it to be clean sailing with no issues. There are going to be problems with this, just like with any rollout you have of brand new technology. So, Kevin, your software side, take it from there, my friend.
Yeah, I think I largely agree with that. I do. I mean, I don't like rolling out new technology is hard. We are, the alpha testers. That means that we will encounter bugs. And PES was a different kind of problem that they were solving. It was a caching problem and the sort of item management stuff. So we will see different problems with server meshing. I just expectation setting wise, I'm very prepared for bugs. And whether that means that my ship gets blown up or I wind up stuck in limbo somewhere, or, I wind up back where I started after going somewhere or what have you. But I think what I'm looking for, the dream of server meshing, right, is that they can sort of continue to expand the universe and keep the server tick rate the same. So that you can actually have, fun NPCs to fight in bunker missions because they're not all sitting there on, 5 FPS being shooting you where you were, what is that? A fifth of a second ago.
Mm-hmm.
And that we can have this big sprawling universe, but have a uniform tick rate. So we'll see if that happens. And I do suspect that they'll roll it out in ways to try to minimize the jank. I suspect they'll roll it out. If I were doing this, I would be like, okay, like you said, Tibio, first it's just one server inside the sort of like server meshing orchestrator doohickey container. And then they assign one server to each of the planets in Stanton, for example. And then they see if they can subdivide further. But
Right. So if I could sum up that whole conversation, the day server meshing goes out, probably for a window there, I would not expect dogfighting to be necessarily incredibly pretty. But I also, at this point, am desperately hoping that we can actually log in to have a bad dogfight. I think that's achievable.
Okay.
Yeah, 100%.
I cannot wait for the time when I don't need a new system. I don't need anything to grow. Just having the system and the stuff that we have right now with the game running well would be great. And I think that's honestly all a lot of people want. It's like, yeah, it's not fully featured. It's not incredibly built out, but what we have there is good if it just ran more stably. And I think a lot of people are hoping for that. But at the same time, we should make sure to emphasize that this isn't necessarily a solution to all of our problems, right?
Oh no, this is mechanical. This is way down in the guts, right? It will enable them to solve problems. In and of itself, the only problem it will really help with is that, that 30 FPS from the server. What is in that 30 FPS is not going to be impacted at all by server meshing, right? It's not suddenly going to make base building possible, right?
Yeah.
That would be pretty funny. Server meshing is out and suddenly this new feature just popped up out of nowhere.
Yeah. I think the features will roll out quickly once it's there,
Sure.
but it is not, it is a I just want to harp on that, right? This is a structural improvement, not a like a feature improvement.
Sure.
Right.
So much like PES allowed them to do other things like salvage or the cargo refactor, this is going to allow teams to do a lot more with the stuff
or
that
have
they have.
piles of crews all over the place. Yeah.
Yes, and medical gowns. But this is the end of a road that they set up 6 years ago, right? Well, the beginning of the end of a road, right? Server meshing was that thing that they put up as road to release. We want to do persistence and we want to do 64-bit precision and object container streaming and server meshing at the end.
I think it is the last of the core mechanics that they're missing. Obviously, there are a bunch of other smaller mechanics, but this feels to me like the big culmination of getting the core structure in place. So people might call me silly, but I have hope at this point because they've demonstrated something that actually works. And they seem to, again, they're a little too happy with how things are going, and I think that concerns them as well. But they seem pretty pleased with how things are going. So I actually do have some optimism here.
Cool. And Kevin, were you going to say something?
I just 100% agreed.
All right.
And I mean, I say to the devs, like, I'm pulling for you. I'm super excited for this to work. I know that there will be bugs, but I, trust that you can iron them out. And, really, excited for this, excited to see where this goes. And know you have a lot of hard work ahead of you. But yeah.
And at the end of the day, please tell us how you did it.
Exactly. Yes. Buy you a beer. If I see you at a CitizenCon sometime, because I want to hear the stories, and you deserve it for pulling off something so monumental.
Absolutely.
I bet there's a lot of stories.
Oh my God.
All right.
Yes.
Well, thank you both again for joining me for this conversation. I think this was a great overview with a couple little like technical jabs in there about how server meshing is coming along. But honestly, I'm glad that we kept it a little more layman because this is not easy to understand. So thank you both for joining me. Before we go, I want to give you a chance to let folks know where your own video is. We talked a lot about your reactions and stuff to this concept. Can you let them know where they can find your own content? Tibio, go ahead and start us off.
Oh, okay. Yeah. My channel is, I guess, at Mr. Tibio. And I have a Discord server that came out today, just because people yelled at me for not being able to contact me. So I did it, and I'm not sure I like that, but we'll see how it goes.
Discord. Yeah, I actually was looking to get in contact for a little while. I ended up going to the YouTube comments, which worked out. We made it.
Absolutely.
But yeah, people love to get onto the Discord and throw all of their requests, which video they want next. So I'll be able to go in there and I'll request a couple. But thank you again for joining me for this, Kevin. Where can folks find your videos?
So the Star Citizen videos are on my channel, Free Association, or if you just search my name, you should be able to pull that up. I'm not nearly as prolific as Tibio.
That felt like an insult.
I did not mean it as an insult. You have done an impressive job of posting like every day since you started. I post when I have something to say, and so this is also side project to side project to side project to side project. So if you want other technical things from me on YouTube, my channel Critical Point, which you can find at criticalpoint.tv, we'll have the YouTube link. I have interviews with software engineers about that time they broke production, and so yeah, get to go deep dive into other people's systems, other people's incidents.
Nice. Well, thank you again, both of you, for coming on. We'll have the contacts linked down below in the show notes for you guys. You know where you can find them. Thank you for listeners and viewers for coming to this episode. If you are watching on YouTube, hello, hi. We appreciate you. But you might also be listening on an audio platform, and those are ad-free, supported by our supporters, and generally uninterrupted by YouTube's shenanigans. So if you prefer that, check out your favorite audio platform. You can find this podcast, Citizen Central, and our community Greenhouse podcast on there. That being said, our supporters also get a couple of extras, so we're going to go ahead and hop on off of here and answer a couple of these Q&As with supporters sitting with us on the live show, which is one of the perks you get from that. And we will be with you guys again later. Tybio and Kevin, thanks again for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
And thank you all for listening. We'll see you next week.